So Symposium this year was supposed to be in Chicago, which was going to be awesome because Chicago is amazing, and I've been wanting to visit Chicago for months or for over a year now, and then Rona got us. But instead, it was virtual. Like most years, Jake was there providing levity and, as the British say, taking the piss out of the whole thing, which I think was really great and definitely necessary. Add a little bit of levity. I was back in October, and it just kind of underscored how 2020 is weird no matter what we do. I was very excited by the keynote. It was a local boy here in Baltimore, Aaron Watkins. He's a director at Johns Hopkins. I actually 1 degree from John. I used to work, or from with Aaron. I used to work with his. Actually, I guess. Anyway, I've met him a couple times. He's a really, really great, smart guy. He talked about Hopkins' role at the center of spreading actual information about COVID, and all the ways that they're able to do that, and how luckily they had a solution that scaled. I found it interesting that they didn't really talk much about how the technology helped with that. I really wish they had done that. It's one of the things that I kind of had hoped there was a little less, markety-y and more, realistic of these are the things of Sitecore that we used. But anyway, it was still really great to see a friendly face up on the screen, and and know that the tools that we implement can actually be used for really big, important things. It's not just selling a few more widgets or moving a couple more, getting a couple more donations, that it actually really can be part of something really big in the world. So what's some of the big news from the Symposium this year? We got a chance to meet Sitecore's new CEO, Steve Zakakis. He was named CEO back in September, but this is the first time we really had a chance to know him. He's a veteran of global stuff, especially with SAP. He spent the past 5 years working in SAP in Europe and EMEA. I found it interesting he's going to be based out of Sitecore's London office. That's going to be, I was surprised by that. But, it seems like he's got his eye on the prize of continuing to make Sitecore a really great company and to achieve the things that they really are capable of. Do any of you guys, any of you had a chance to meet him? One of the things I realized about this presentation is I love, since it's not going to be nearly as long as they have been in the past, to make sure to open this up to conversation while we're going through it. So if anyone has any thoughts or any interjections, feel free to speak up or throw spitballs or whatever.
No, I actually don't know anybody really in the general community that's met him. I mean, I've heard people talk about him, but I don't know anybody that's met him yet. And I do think the London office is interesting, but I mean, I'm guessing that he didn't want to relocate to the U.S. That'll be, because we either have presence here or, where you expect Sitecore to be out of, or the key pieces. So, London, I could see London making sense.
Yeah. And I mean, it is 2020, right? I wouldn't want to move across the world right now.
Or here specifically.
Yeah, right. All right. So, your favorite image. So one of the other big takeaways that I had was Sitecore's real focus on Content Hub and the way that they're going all in and really starting to see the benefits of their acquisition a few years ago of Style Labs. That the big thing, in my opinion, is that they announced that SaaS product they talked about last year that was supposed to be out last summer, that it's basically going to be Content Hub, serving up web content, CDN through CAS, which we'll talk about in a second, to provide content for headless websites, and that's really where they're going with it. I think, I have my own opinions about headless stuff.
So, a quick question, Ed. Yeah. Where do you see XP and CAS in working together?
I don't. I honestly don't. I don't see the compelling case for marrying those two things up. And I think that this is a big shift in Sitecore's paradigm of, before they basically sold one product, right? And that all of the various SKUs that you would think of were, add-ons for that, right? So like XP was kind of a scaled back of XM was a scaled back version of the product. Commerce was an extension of the product that extended it to do commerce things, all the various like modules like EXM, that those were things that extended it again to enable different things, but it was really still kind of the same product. But now what they've done with Content Hub is that now they're building more of a product portfolio of things that can actually stand on their own, right? That, before you couldn't really buy, you couldn't use Sitecore Commerce or XC if you didn't use XP, right? If you didn't have the CMS, there was no point in buying the commerce platform. And if you bought the commerce platform, you had to buy the CMS because they were tightly coupled. But now, they've got that whole stack and that whole product line. And now they've got a whole other product line, right? And that's what I think the SaaS product is going to be. I had really hoped that what they were going to do was re-engineer a lot of the kind of core product and get it, and find ways to make it work as a more cloud-based tool. But instead, what they did was they bought a really great cloud-based tool that they realized had a lot of features that could be leveraged to provide a web content management experience, and that's what they do. So at least that's my take on it. I don't think that really many of the customers that would be a customer for Sitecore, this like Sitecore as we know it, are going to necessarily be the same customers who are going to be wanting, Sitecore, Content Hub, CAS, whatever, right? There might be some overlap, but the use cases are just very different, right? And I think that what they're kind of doing here is now they've got one foot in what I would consider like a very traditional paradigm with their current product, right? And they've got another foot in this more emerging, more, I'm going to say more modern, but I also want to call it, kind of trendier thing that I don't know if necessarily is going to have the same legs of what we've seen, the 10, 15 year, 20 years worth of integrated web content management software the same way we have. But, there's a market for it right now. And now they've got strong plays in both of those, right? And I think
it's going to be messy for a while, I think, is the short version, because you're right, Ed. Content Hub is not a direct substitution for what XP does.
Yep.
And so I think it's going to be up to all of us to evaluate closely what's the right fit, because there's things about Content Hub that are brilliant and that really work well together. I'm super enthusiastic about it, but there's a lot of traditional XP core CMS stuff that it still does better than anything else. And I think it's going to be an interesting few years to figure out how Sitecore, what is Sitecore going to do with XP? I would love to see it paired back to the awesome fundamentals and just have it roll with that.
Yeah. And I think, at that same, so my perspective on that really comes from last year's symposium when there was a presentation on the future of headless stuff. And it was done by Dean Barker, actually, who now ironically works for Epi. That he talked a lot about the way that software products grow, and that they start out really small, they get a dedicated a dedicated user base. And as they start,
turn on the light.
and as they start trying to chase, a bigger market, they end up trying to account for more and more edge cases, right? That they start adding more and more functionality that may or not be necessarily useful for 90% of their customers, but in order to take, that extra 10%, that they'll add stuff in, right? Like, I think a lot of the things that we've seen in XP over the past couple of years have been things that weren't necessarily useful for the majority of their customers, but for a small but important slice of them, they really were, right? Things like having the multiple Sitecore role, like instance roles, right? That I would guess that 85-90% of the Sitecore installs out there don't ever really need all that stuff, right? That there's a CMS instance and 2 CD and 2 CD instances, right? That's the extent. And that, those instances are doing all of the things that they've historically always done for every version prior. But for a handful of users and for very important and influential and, ones with lots of licensing dollars, they need those extra roles because they are getting a ton of, because they get so much traffic that they need to break that out. And I think, a lot of the complexity that we've seen in the product has been because of that. And I agree. I think it will be fantastic to see them do a more modern version of the software, maybe written on, on .NET Core, so that we, so that you have much better hosting options, and that, that maybe doesn't have all of that, but that, does also still have backwards compatibility, so that if you had written you had written a pipeline processor, that it still will work, as opposed to, the migration path for something like Content Hub, where it's just 2 completely different things, and there's no analog.
All right, let's move on then.
That's right. I forgot. I want to try to get done before my wife gets home. So yeah, the other thing in addition to Content Hub being a big focus was CAS, Content as a Service. And what Content as a Service is a CDN layer that lives next to Content Hub that allows you to publish web content and other stuff from Content Hub out around the globe through Azure, and that you interact with it via GraphQL, so that this way you don't have, and I think the reason that this was done was because it would be very expensive to scale all of the functionality of Content Hub out into enough places and large enough to essentially do a good job of delivering all that content when everybody's browser is now directly requesting it all the time, right? So by creating this new layer that handles the content delivery for all of that, it lets the scalable layer, or the layer that they have to scale, be a lot thinner and lighter, to make it a little bit more economical as adoption increases. So that's my take on Content as a Service, and I think it's a catchy name that
Is this out right now, or is this something
I don't
planning?
know. I think it's one of those.
It's 10.1.
Yeah, it's 10.1.
Okay.
So
This coming spring.
yeah, this kind of string. So I did an assessment recently of another CMS product that we were asked to assess versus several of the major players, and it was closer to this. And there's definitely a market for it. So Sitecore is definitely filling a need that is out there, or at least a want or something like that. That there are, and this was the place that the product that I was helping assess. They were they're not something that they were going to launch. They were working on launching a newer version of it, a better version. They were looking for feedback on it, but they had clients using really just the content, a true headless just content piece to it. No personalization, no analytics or so. They had people that were just using just the content, and there was no front end. You built a front end. So they had clients, real ones. So I could see this aspect of what they're offering here being something that they're going to get some use out of. I mean, definitely.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of demand for it out there, and there are some established players that do a pretty decent job of it. And I think that Sitecore realized that, hey, there's probably room in that market for one more.
And
they're doing it
as they evolve the rest of the offering, like we were just talking about or so. I mean, I could see that not only would they get business here, because Content Hub is a product, or Style Labs and whatnot. Before it was Content Hub, it's an established product with established clients, and a good one, like we've talked about here already today. But the key thing is that if you did get a business that didn't need personalization, didn't need any of that kind of stuff, great, sell it to them. But there's a good chance that after they have some sort of presence or they've updated it, that they're probably going to need those things. And if they're going to need those things, why wouldn't they use what Sitecore services are? So I think it's a good plan. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of everything evolves to marry to these kind of things.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's really going to be interesting about it too is that the skills required for it and all of that it's different than what we're used to, right? Like, it's not like it's just like a brand new .NET solution. It's the way you work with it is different. And I think there's going to be some growing pains as partners and customers get used to that and adjust to it.
Do we know, if they are planning to use the Content Hub web client SDKs or the REST APIs with the CAS, or are they building completely different?
No, yet. I haven't seen enough on it.
There is a new, I know a little bit about it. There's a new GraphQL component to it, and that's not part of Content Hub today. And then later on in one of the other talks, they showed basically, I don't know what they exactly mean by this, but they showed the item service and some of the Sitecore JSS services extending to cover, they had an architecture diagram, here's XP, here's Content Hub, and over it is this API layer that is
but now it's
common
content.
to both.
Yeah, now it's not item, it's content, right? Instead.
Yeah, so again, they showed that architecture picture, but I don't know really what it means. Are they talking about new APIs? Are they talking about same API contracts, but you don't know as a developer whether you're talking to Content Hub or Sitecore? I kind of feel like there's enough differences between the object models in both systems that you can't just fudge that difference. But that's what they were showing anyway. So it'd be interesting.
You could do a lot with GraphQL.
Yeah.
GraphQL is actually an open platform though, right?
It's more of a standard than anything.
Yeah.
It's how you query for something. But still, it all depends on what's the structure of the thing you're querying.
Right, because in Content Hub, I don't think you have that same relationships or the same nature of relationships between content objects as you do inside Sitecore, right? That in Sitecore, you have that strong hierarchical tree.
Actually, in Content Hub, I believe they do, right? They actually store the relationship between content or entities in the form of relationships, right? And they do have a graph server which does the processing as part of your entity creation or modification.
I think though one of the big differences between the way XP and Content Hub works is that XP does have that hierarchy, that whole, convention of the nested tree
Mhm.
being the URL. And that's not a concept that's really in Content Hub at all.
Content Hub though, yeah.
So what it's going to do, and this is actually, if you think about the way that single page applications work in React, what it means is that the front end is now really in control of page transitions. And we're not really thinking about the sort of older relationship that this is a file on a disk, it was in a folder, and that's how we construct the URL. I think there's some interesting things that enables, and a lot of ways you can hurt yourself.
I think how much worse the SEO is even then.
Man,
We've already talked about it and for work, but that'll take it to the next level.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's just the next way that that whiz bang new trends are going to try to break the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And that now we're going to have to figure out ways to engineer backwards compatibility into everything. Right.
Well, I mean, it's already happening, right? The whole premise behind your single page applications is that you're going to use the, what do they call it? Page history, history APIs, and you're basically telling the browser how to write the navigation history, which to me is a whole bunch of extra cruft.
Yep.
On top of the fact that you don't understand how the URL works.
Yeah, that's like dynamic breadcrumbs.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God. Oh, there was a trend that I don't miss.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's we should move on because there's so many things we could talk about. That could be a whole separate.
Well, and one of the things, just this is another good thing for my pitch here, and I'll bring up, because while we were doing this, I put in the next 3 kind of meetings that we're going to have, and like we're on the Sitecore 10 slide, but a couple of meetings we're going to talk more about Sitecore 10 and Docker as like a good 20-30 minute presentation for that day. And the idea is to unpack a lot of these new things. So like I said, if you guys want to talk about something, reach out and get you on the schedule for next year, because I'd like for us to just every couple of weeks, as long as it works out, meet and keep talking about these things. So deeper dives. All
right. So back to my beautiful slides here. Sitecore 10 is actually still out. One of the big things that was announced is automated personalization. What I say is for normal people who are getting less than 1,000 or 1 million visits a day. I don't think it was necessarily that bad on the previous one, but there was a relatively high threshold that the automated personalization algorithms required before it actually made any sense and could really do anything. They talked about how now with the new version of this that you don't need all of that, and that means hopefully we're going to it's going to be much more useful for, again, the 85% of Sitecore's customers who actually really need it. And they confirmed that there is a Sitecore 10.1 on the horizon. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody.
By the way, before you flip slides, for people who don't know, Sitecore 10 is actually it's a good release. There's a lot of good developer experience stuff in there. So we've been encouraging people, like, if they're thinking about doing upgrades, there's actually not much difference from a end user feature perspective. I know Sitecore will hate me for this. There's actually not much difference between 9.3 and 10. But for the developer experience side, 10 is a big uplift. And finally, we can put that whole unicorn versus TDS debate to rest. Right? There's that new serialization framework. It looks super nice. I'm so excited to get to work with it and never have to think about TDS versus unicorn ever again.
You have no idea how excited I am to never have to think about TDS again. It is my arch enemy of Sitecore technologies.
Hey, it sucked before it though.
Oh man.
Oh my God. Yes. Anyway. Let's get on to the next slide, because I had fun with this one, and I think there's a bit to talk about here too.
We're covering this in depth too, like 2 meetings from now.
Yep, and that's why it's a big deal, especially because it means you're going to have cross-cloud options now. There are some implications though. One, you're going to need truly beefier development environments to use it. But the upside is that it's going to speed up and hopefully solve one of the problems that's existed in the Sitecore world for years now, which is the time it takes a developer to get their own environments running that they can actually, use locally. Every project I've worked on in the past couple of years, it took probably a week for someone who was new to the project to get things up and running because, oh, you need to get this version, you need to get this thing running, and oh, there's this config file that we can't source control for some reason, or oh yeah, you got to spend a week trying to figure out why SSL won't work on your local Mongo instance or something ridiculous like that, because there are so many moving parts. And
because Solar is not working.
Oh my God! So yes, all of that insanity. And so even though you're now going to need machines with 64 gigs of RAM,
1 terabyte.
Just 1 terabyte of RAM, it's fine. But when you do that, it means that you're now going to speed up your ability to start developing significantly, which I think is going to be really good. And all sorts of things like being able to store machine configurations as source controlled stuff. It's just great. But there is a big important thing coming along with this as well, which means after 10.1, there's no more Azure Pass that they want you to use containers for or containers in Azure, which I think is going to be there are some real implications to that, and I'm not sure it's being handled.
No, this is going to be interesting conversations with clients and whatnot.
Yep.
For any of
Everybody
us
needs to start preparing now,
Yep.
because it's the learning curve is not small. So it makes sense why Sitecore is doing this. I mean, but it's a huge shift in their strategy.
Yep.
Because for the last 3 years, right, Microsoft's been up on stage, right? Keynote, whole big stage platform, talking about how closely Sitecore and Azure and Sitecore and Microsoft are aligned.
Mhm.
So this is yes, they're still talking about Azure Kubernetes service, but this move is really about that cross-cloud compatibility, which I know some people want to take advantage of, but ditching of PaaS after we'd spent years realigning ourselves to move to PaaS from IaaS, to switch it up on everybody again. There's
At least it means that we've all still going to have jobs.
Yeah.
All right, so those were the big takeaways. It was great. We also had, as usual, a more entertainment-oriented aspect to the event as well. In this case, Leslie Odom Jr., famous for Brent's favorite musical.
I didn't know who he was.
He sat down with Paige and had a talking about his experiences, and did a bit of a performance. I was disappointed. I figured this would be a nice thing to see live if it had actually happened in reality. But my wife was in the other room as I was watching the session, and she's like, "Is that Leslie Odom Jr.?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "What are you doing in a meeting with him?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's just a new business thing. Don't worry about it." And she was like, "Wait, what?" And I had to fess up. But it made me locally famous here for a second. But one of the other things that really drove home was that virtual conferences are strange, and we live in a weird world right now. And I'm glad that we still did it. It was definitely better than nothing, and there were some real upsides, right? That one of the things that I always found awkward in previous years was, sometimes you just couldn't get to the session that you want to see because it's on the other side of the thing, and you've got to take a call between sessions, or it's in the other hotel, and
I was gonna say, it's in the other hotel. Yeah.
Yep. Or you're in a session and you realize, oh, this isn't what I thought this was going to be, but you're sitting up in the second row and you don't want to be that guy getting up and leaving, like, you know, after the second slide. So
I think that that's a really cool thing. Like everything's in video. Like for instance,
Yep.
like Ed, you talked about this guy. I can't find his presentation, right?
Oh my goodness. And I wish I had sat there and recorded the whole thing.
Right. And we've got some notes. I just like, while you were talking about him, I was like, oh man, I had forgotten the guy's name because I was thinking about that presentation as well.
Yep. Yep.
It's nowhere to be found.
And his
but,
portions.
but at least this one, all digital, we can actually go back, catch all the highlights. And there's some good stuff buried in there. I think it was a little bit hard to get to in the moment. But I love the fact that it's all been recorded and is still live after the event. We can go back to it and say, oh, what was that thing again? Because I missed that the first time.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, you know, assuming that we get vaccines that are, I mean, they're all successful in the news, but assuming that we get vaccines and we have a real symposium next year, it'd be interesting to see if the lessons that, you know, those kind of benefits, lessons about what kind of benefits they got from this symposium, they take advantage of for the next one. Meaning, like, shouldn't every, I mean, I know I've at least had this conversation with several people that are here on the meeting in the past, which is they should record every single one of them. You know, I mean, not just the keynotes.
Like that was the thing. I know that if you go back and you look on YouTube, Sitecore actually released some of the ones, I think from like 2018.
Yeah, but not all of them.
Not all of them.
Yep. So yeah, I'm hoping that they get better about that. You know, for the same reason that I'm glad that we've always recorded our sessions and that we throw them up on YouTube. That you know, I've referred to stuff that's been discussed in them before.
Oh yeah, some of the there's like this migration one for I think Children's Hospital. I go back and I watch that at least twice.
Yep.
So yeah, I think there are some things that came out of this virtual conference that are really interesting that I hope they carry forward to the next physical thing. It was not a replacement for like a real in-person symposium, but there were definitely things that Sitecore tried out that I hope they continue.
Yeah, it was funny. During symposium, my company usually tries to take our clients out to dinner. You know, instead of doing like the booth thing, we just want to do something for them to, like, you know, feel appreciated and spend some time and catch up and all of that in person in a more informal setting. Obviously, we couldn't do that this year. So this year, instead, we sent them all Lou Malnati's pizza, which ships in case you ever need to send a bit of Chicago to someone. It was a highlight of my life getting a chance to order $700 worth of pizzas. And then expense it. So speaking of next year,
Yuck.
it is in Las Vegas again.
Yuck. Yuck.
Yeah, I found out it's at the Wynn, which I'm less excited about because Steve Wynn is a cretin and I hate giving that guy money. I was really hoping it would be back at the Aria because it felt the least Las Vegas-y of all the Vegas places, but oh well.
Okay.
I was actually looking forward to the Chicago thing this year because I've never actually been to Chicago.
Oh, it's such a great city.
Been to the airport several times.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.